Hello, a very good evening to you from Cleethorpes for this special edition of the UK Tonight, looking at what today's budget means for you and your family. The Chancellor Jeremy Hunt confirmed that 2p cut to national insurance, a giveaway for some 27 million workers. And there was help on child benefit for high-earning parents. But there was no rabbit out of the hat. And as our political editor Beth Rigby reports, it didn't have the feel of a pre-election budget.
A pre-election budget, this moment as much about the politics as the economics. This may be the last chance to shift the dial for a Conservative Party 20 points behind in the polls. A huge opportunity for this Chancellor, and one matched with big expectations from his party and the public.
We can now help families not just with temporary cost of living support, but with permanent cuts in taxation.
But the only big cut in this budget was 2 percentage points off national insurance. This a repeat of Mr Hunt's big giveaway last November that failed to move the polls. And his other more modest move, changes to child benefit to help higher earners.
From this April, the high-income child benefit charge threshold will be raised from £50,000 to £60,000.
There were some new taxes too on vaping, business class plane tickets and holiday lets, and a new measure to abolish tax breaks for so-called non-doms who live in the UK with a permanent home overseas. It was a policy taken from the opposition benches and made the Chancellor's own.
The government will abolish the current tax system for non-doms, get rid of the outdated concept of domicile.
The Prime Minister looking pleased with a budget he's understood to have been heavily involved in.
Sir Keir Starmer.
But Labour quick to point voters back to an unprecedented tax burden set by a Tory government.
Britain in recession, the national credit card maxed out, and despite the measures today, the highest tax burden for 70 years.
Budget delivered the PM and his Chancellor straight out on a visit to a builder's merchant. The question is, have voters simply stopped listening?
Did you catch any of Jeremy's budget? No, because you're all working too hard.
The message of today's modest tax cuts could prove a hard sell.
Hi, Beth.
Hi, Chancellor. Nice to see you.
Likewise.
How are you doing?
Very good, thank you.
We've just had your budget. We don't know when the general election will be, but is this your last throw of the dice?
Absolutely not. We have produced today a budget that shows that we are turning a corner. We have had a plan since the time I became Chancellor to bring down inflation and restore growth. And the changes that we've made today on national insurance, combined with what we did in the autumn, mean that we'll fill around 1 in 5 vacancies in the economy.
I will come back to the tax burden because the OBR forecasts show that it's going to be going to the highest level in 70 years by the end of the forecast. What I want to ask you now, though, is should we expect another fiscal event before a general election, or is this it?
Well, that depends when the Prime Minister decides to call the election. But whenever that is, and that is the key point. You've just talked about the tax burden, so let me just address that point. Of course, taxes have gone up because we spent over £400 billion helping families through the pandemic and through a cost of living crisis.
If you were looking for pre-election fireworks in this budget, well, look away now. Jeremy Hunt chose fiscal responsibility over political excitement. The long shadow of Liz Truss's mini-budget still looms large. What the Chancellor wants to show you is that the Tories can be trusted on the economy and they will cut your taxes. But here's the rub. The overall tax burden in our nation is still going up, and households on average are going to be worse off going into the next general election than they were the last time they went to the polls. This a budget that could well struggle to bring about political renewal. Already talk around here of another fiscal event later in the year before an autumn general election. The March budget done, but still no spring in the Tories' step. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
So no fireworks, but let's take a look at what we did get, the key announcements from today's budget. National insurance, of course, that was the headline. It's going to be cut by 2p from April, reducing to 8% for employees and 6% for those who are self-employed. The high-income child benefit charge threshold, that's going to be raised from £50,000 to £60,000. And the government is going to get rid of the non-dom tax status. The VAT registration threshold for businesses, that's going to increase to £90,000. The government will invest almost £6 billion in the NHS, including £3.4 billion in modernising its IT systems. The government is going to launch a British ISA, allowing an investment of up to £5,000 more in UK equity per year. There's going to be a new duty on vaping products. That's going to be introduced in 2026. And there will be a one-off increase in tobacco duty. The government will maintain the 5p cut to fuel duty for another year. And the alcohol duty freeze, that's going to continue until February 2025. So they're the headlines. Our political correspondent Gurpreet Narwan was following it all with me here in Cleethorpes and Grimsby today. And Gurpreet, as Beth said there, no fireworks. It was sensible, it was conservative, but was it enough for the from the Chancellor ahead of a general election?
Yeah, this was what could be the last budget after 14 years of Conservative government. And based on where we are in the electoral cycle and where the Conservatives are in the polls, Jeremy Hunt really needed to do something to galvanise the public. He needed to go big. And I think, in fact, the budget kind of fell flat. A lot of people found it quite boring. Now, that's not to take away from the fact that that 2p cut in national insurance is significant. When you combine it with the 2p we saw in November, that 4p amounts to about £900 a year for an average household. So it is a significant tax cut. The problem is it's being sandwiched by massive tax rises in the form of those frozen tax thresholds. So however much Jeremy Hunt tries to sell this as a tax-cutting budget, he's not fooling anyone because it's a massively tax-raising parliament. And that was sort of the biggest announcement he said he had, but it was leaked in the press, or it was given to the press beforehand. And everything else in the budget, well, there was no big surprise there.
There were no rabbits.
There were no rabbits. The freeze in fuel duty was largely expected. The closest thing that came to a rabbit was the changes in child benefit, but there wasn't anything massive in there. And so people, when they go into the polls, the reality is that they are going to be worse off than they were compared to the last time that they went to the polls. And at the same time, they are looking at cuts to public spending. We were expecting that the Chancellor would cut public spending. He didn't. But that doesn't take away from the fact that the current plans he has in place mean that unprotected budgets, things like courts and prisons and local authorities, are facing really massive cuts to public spending. And there is no appetite for that across the electorate, including in places like Grimsby and Cleethorpes, where the promises of levelling up really cut through, and the associated increases in public spending and public infrastructure.
Can I just ask you about the comment the Chancellor made after he delivered the budget to our political editor, Beth Rigby there? Beth put to him that, you know, this was the last throw of the dice, or is this the last throw of the dice for a general election? And he said, absolutely not. What does that mean? What could he do before a general election to make people feel better off going to the polls?
Well, it could mean a number of things, but look, there was a lot of speculation around the fact that this could be a massive budget and then the Tories would go call an election and ask voters to go to the polls. But the reality is the headroom that the Chancellor had to play with, the amount of money, firepower he had, was dramatically reduced compared to what he thought it was going to be at the beginning of the year. He thought he would have £30 billion to play with. In fact, he had £8.9 billion to play with, which means he can't do as much as he would have liked. Now, what he could do is wait for perhaps the Bank of England to cut interest rates. We know that inflation is going to hit 2% by the middle of the year, which means he could wait for that cut. And on the back of that, ask voters to go to the polls, squeeze in one more fiscal event and hope the outlook improves so he can afford to give away, he can afford some bigger giveaways.
OK, watch the space. Gurpreet, for the moment, thank you, Gurpreet. We'll speak later on in the programme. And let's talk a little bit about that. Well, we couldn't call it a rabbit, maybe a bunny that the Chancellor pulled out today. Some good news for parents, or for some of them at least. The Chancellor raising the tax threshold of child benefits. That's going up from £50,000 to £60,000. but it only really benefits higher earners. So what do the people of this area make of that move? Our national correspondent Tom Parmenter has been finding out.
Every day, Mike gets into the sea at Cleethorpes to connect with people through videos and spread some positivity.
Morning, morning. Community is everything, so it's more important than ever that we stick together.
Budget day may be about the numbers, but it's so much more than that.
For me, it comes down to one word: hope. Do you know, hope that, things are going to change and that they can get behind something and believe in it. And I think they need to be able to touch and feel it, and see how it's going to change their life.
In neighbouring Grimsby, at a play session that's free for families, the Chancellor's outlook didn't tally with theirs. The national insurance cut will help Sally's partners take home pay, but not their spending power.
It still quickly disappears because obviously the cost of living goes up. That doesn't really change anything.
So many families here in the West Marsh area of town are just surviving each month.
I don't think today the budget's helped anybody dramatically at all, and I think what it is, it's an election pitch. But they've taken so much away that in this point leading up to an election, I don't see how they can ever give money back that will really help, because anything they give is swallowed up just like that.
Expanding child benefit to reach more families earning up to £60,000 a year is a win for some, but not Alexandra, whose partner has his own electrical business.
I think the child benefit is fair enough. It might not affect us, but I think the major thing for people is the childcare cost.
The Chancellor did reiterate they are helping on childcare and investing in every corner of the country. There are big plans for the docks in Grimsby, but at the art club in a community cafe here, Chelsea had expected much more.
We'll help you, we're going to get it better, the budget's going to go down, this is going to go down, but then it's not, because then a month later it's gone up again. So is it coming down or is it just going up? Either way, you can't win, can you? It's just... Yeah, we're not picking up as a country, we're going back.
There were bits and pieces from this budget, but put together, it hasn't changed the mood here. The drag on the nation's finances runs deep. Tom Parmenter, Sky News, Grimsby.
Well, throughout the year, we're going to be speaking to the people that live in Cleethorpes as well as in Grimsby. They are our target towns as we approach a general election. Tonight, I'm joined by Rochelle Civita, Company Director of Freedom Speaks, a business that focuses on advocacy support and representation for parents with children who have special education needs. I'm also joined by the writers Sarah Stook and Hart Chatter, Director of a property rental agency in the area. Hello, welcome to you all. Right, pop quiz on the budget, go. No, I wouldn't do that to you. I wouldn't do that to you.
Always ladies first.
So, we've had the budget, and I know you've either watched it today live or you've caught up on what the Chancellor announced. Let's just go with your overall feeling, having taken in all the information, because it was billed as the big one before we go to the polls. What were they going to do for people to get them to vote Conservative? Rochelle, did you have anything in there that made you think, yes?
No, not particularly. Found it a disappointing budget, given that we've got a general election coming up. Particularly concerned about a couple of things that I've seen in there more than I'm happy about what there is. VAT for small business promoted as being a benefit to us, but completely missold in my opinion. Slightly happy to see that there's some help for parents in relation to child benefits threshold being increased, but I think it's negligible, much like most of what I've read.
Yeah, what about you, Sarah? How did you come away from it feeling?
I think, I'm generally quite cynical when it comes to politics, so I was never really expecting anything. But from a perspective as a young person, I don't feel like it was a budget. Well, I don't feel like it was a budget for any age. I don't think it was a budget for my generation or younger or particularly for older people. My parents' age, people older than that. Not saying my parents are old. Let's make that clear.
They'll be watching, Sarah. You'll be in trouble.
Yes. So I'm not particularly impressed. I did think it was going to be a bit more of a giveaway, a bit more of a you tell your child if you get good grades, you'll get them a laptop kind of thing. So I thought it was particularly restrained from that point, but nothing particularly I think would help me personally, or perhaps any voters who are subject to changing their minds.
Yeah, we've been hearing that people wanted big ideas, something bold in this general election year. What they got was sensible and conservative, which, you know, it sounds like doesn't help anyone.
Well, even Dick Turpin wore a mask, and it definitely is the case. I mean, as taxpayers, we're still being lied to, and they're stealing off us. And, I mean, they've offered this a token gesture with the national insurance, and they've said they're going to abolish that. So if they go down that route, and that's just to get the voters on the side for the Tory party, if that will sustain their, claim as the leaders of the country, I don't think it will. But if they go down that route with the national insurance, then the Treasury will only suffer, and then where will they find further funds to fill the coffers? And then they brought the VAT in. We're going to increase to 90,000 as a threshold. But really, it's tangible, because a lot of businesses, small businesses like myself, it won't make a great deal of difference. The corporation tax, which is it's a big, for me, a big bugbear, they've reduced that slightly. And regarding the child tax for the high earners, again, they've put it to £60,000, and they're going to taper it to £80,000. So the higher earners who are there already paying far too much tax, it's not made a great deal of difference. But they need to really think about what they're going to go doing forward, which I don't think they really have.
Yeah. Let's go back to the small business idea, and you mentioned some of it there. And Rochelle, I know from talking to you last night on the programme that, you're really passionate about getting businesses help, and there are a lot of small businesses in this area. Was there anything in that budget to help small businesses? Because it feels like it's all for medium-sized and bigger businesses, especially when it comes to investment, to help any kind of small business here in the Grimsby and Cleethorpes area. There wasn't really that much.
To expect nothing less now for small businesses. Medium and big corporations, as far as I'm concerned, they can sail away, but us small businesses, you need to read what the Chancellor's got to say alongside what's written, but he's missold the VAT matter as far as I'm concerned. He's suggested that it will be increased to 90,000, but those that are already registered for VAT are already in the pot. And so that makes no difference to a lot of small businesses. And of course, we also remember that VAT is for turnover. It actually equates to £416 extra a month as turnover difference for those that aren't VAT registered currently. It just doesn't seem to make any particular sense as to why they're doing it. And should we be grateful? I don't feel very grateful for that, I'm afraid.
Sarah, the Chancellor did mention in the statement about, young people getting on the property ladder. Is there much for young people? I mean, he also mentioned levelling up, and, a lot of that levelling up will go into big projects that may not benefit people, young people right now, but sort of further down the line. There wasn't much in there about social housing, which is so desperately needed. He announced, investment in Canary Wharf and Barking Riverside, and, is that social housing? What is that? Where do you feel you are on the housing side of things?
The problem is, in the 1990s, house prices versus your income was 4% higher. Now it's 8.8%, so it's doubled over the last 30 years. When you've got that much inequality, when you have older people telling us, you should stop buying avocados or stop buying Amazon and Netflix, when your income doesn't stretch as far, when houses are far more expensive, when you've got MPs who live in constituencies where house prices are double the national average, saying, we can't have 20 houses on that tiny green space that dog walkers only use because they're catering to their older voters. Yes, older people vote more, but when those older people die out and my generation is starting to vote, we're not going to vote Conservative, we're not going to vote Labour. It's the only age group that Tories are winning are 60 plus. So, when we come out to vote, I think they shouldn't be surprised when we don't vote for them. So maybe consider young people for once, and supposedly being the party of aspiration. Well, it's an aspiration only for wealthy pensioners.
Harp, just a final thought from you. We did hear from the Chancellor that this might not be the last fiscal move from the government before a general election. What would be the big thing for you to get you on their side?
It's immigration.
Okay.
You can maybe say it's not part of the budget, but I'm afraid it has a ripple effect. From policing down to my sector, housing, and the NHS, the frontline staff who are there day in, day out, catering for our needs, and people end up at A&E, they can't be seen for whatever reason. Now, I'm not saying they should stop immigration, but the criteria and the standards of letting people into the country, they've got to set a mandate like a lot of other countries around the world do. And that's something I'm very passionate about. And I think it's something that if Labour want to get into power, and they were a stronghold here before the last election, they've got to come out and say, OK, this is something. And that will stabilise the country. And also, it's the first thing on people's lips that comes out of their mouth, whether you're in your local public house, you're in the library, you're at the gym, it is immigration.
OK. Hart, Sarah and Rochelle, we're going to talk to you more over the course of the year as we build up to the general election. Plenty more to say, but for the moment, thank you. This is where we're going to ask for a bit of audience participation now. We want to find out whether people here tonight are better or worse off as a result of today's budget. Now, we have a calculator on our website. It's live on our app as well. If you scan the QR code on your screen, you can check your finances as well. We're going to get everybody here at the Cleethorpes Tap House and Kitchen to take part as well. We're going to give everyone a few minutes during the break to do that, and we'll find out what the results are when we come back.
Big stories don't always come from big cities. I'm Lisa Dowd and I'm Sky's Midlands correspondent, and this is where I grew up. We can reveal that the driver who hit Harry Dunn is 42-year-old Anne Sakoulas.
Just met the president and we never thought we'd get this far.
This is what they're up against. The wind is the really big problem. It is back-breaking work and the smoke is thick. It's been working well. Water levels are dropping, but no one knows what impact further rain will have. What would you do if this place wasn't open? We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
It's really scary. We're terrified.
In this community, I'm told that everybody knows someone affected by COVID.
Hopefully this will be the last wave.
I never knew they would make it. It's amazing.
Change seems tantalisingly close in this corner of the UK. Wales was the first to introduce the plastic bag charge. This is my patch, my specialism. It's also my home.
Hello, welcome back to Cleethorpes. Now, before the break, we asked you at home and people here at Cleethorpes Tap House and Kitchen to use the calculator that's on our website and on our app, which will basically calculate, given today's announcements in the budget, whether you are better or worse off as a result. It's a really handy tool. So let's find out how Cleethorpes have gone on. Our little sample here. Hands up, who is better off after today's announcement? Can we have a show of hands? Anyone better off? Just one gentleman at the bar there. Who's worse off? Right, OK. Let's have a little chat to Phoebe and Kiani. Now, you put your hands up, you've done your calculations and you're worse off. Kiani, do you mind telling me by how much?
£47.50 a week.
A week? Mm-hmm. Were you quite shocked by that?
I was, because that's the whole food shop and travel. Petrol.
Yeah.
A week.
Phoebe, what about you? What did you discover?
Mine was £42.
A week?
Yeah, again, it's quite a lot because I drive, so that's basically my fuel for a month gone, just gone in thin air.
Talk to me about what it's like, sort of being young, working in this area and trying to make ends meet in a cost of living. I would imagine you're sort of squeezed and, you know, we were just hearing from Sarah on our panel, you know, a lot of young people, it's like, stop buying avocados, stop having your coffees. You've got a right to enjoy yourself as well as to live and work. But what are the concerns for you?
I think that for how hard we work, we should be able to afford goat's butter if we'd like to buy it. But it is tight. Say, unless you want to go to the really cheap shops, you have to spend a lot of money with the food shopping. As I say, with this being taken from our wages on top, it just means you can get even less.
Yeah.
But as for being young, Phoebe's 10 years younger than me. Thanks, it's not as hard because I live with my mum. So obviously I don't have to pay for like rent, and my mum pays the council tax, which I'm thankful for. But I still pay my mum rent. I pay her £30 a week, and because I have a car finance and obviously my insurance, as literally a second-year driver, the insurance hasn't dropped by a lot, so it's forking out about £1,500 just to cover insurance for a year, and it doesn't drop the next year either. So it's quite hard in that perspective, but I think I do have it easier than most adults because obviously I have time to save while I'm at my mum's house, whereas most people can't.
Yeah, thank goodness for mum and dad, eh? If you're in that situation. Phoebe and Kiani, thank you very much. Over £40 a week worse off after today's budget. Check out the calculations on our website and app. And we're going to talk to Sarah Pennells now, consumer finance expert, about what happened in today's budget. And Sarah, we've got some questions from viewers for you. They've been submitting them online. And the first one is about this 2p reduction in national insurance. Seen as a good news headline, but from what we've discovered here, just in this room, and people are discovering at home, it's actually not making them any better off. Why is that?
Yes, as you've been hearing, I mean, there is some good news in the budget, and certainly in terms of the kind of headline-grabbing measures, the 2 percentage point 2p reduction in the national insurance rate, both for people who are employed and self-employed, is the one that is going to generate the most headlines. But there are other measures that are leaving people worse off, and I think one of the ones that has been discussed quite a lot in the autumn statement and previous budgets is the freezing of the income tax thresholds. Now, they've been frozen since 2021. They're due now to be frozen until 28-29. And what that means is that when wages are rising, which they really have been over the last couple of years because inflation has been so much higher, more people start paying basic rate tax who previously were not taxpayers, and then more people who were basic rate taxpayers end up paying higher rate tax. Now, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, which does a lot of number crunching around this time, has worked out that people who earn between £26,000 and £60,000 a year will be better off as a result of both the announcement in the budget today on national insurance and the one in the autumn statement in November, even if you offset that with the freezing of the income tax thresholds. But if you fall outside those wage areas, then you won't be better off. And I think it's also worth putting that cost of living context into it. So we've been tracking the cost of living and how it's been affecting people for 2 years now. And towards the back end of last year, people were telling us the average household was paying almost £500 a month more in household bills and food costs. Now, that will have come down a bit because of the energy prices falling in January and again falling in April, and food costs, some are beginning to come down. But I think that puts into context the government's figure of £900 a year better off for somebody earning £35,000 if you look at the national insurance cut announced today and the one announced in the autumn statement.
Sarah, another question for you. This came in from Howard. He said, what will the national insurance tax cut mean for inflation? Is there a risk that it will go up?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Now, I have to say I'm not an economist, but inflation, the factors that drive inflation are quite complicated. So supply and demand, you know, if people do, as a result of the national insurance cut, all start rushing out to the shops and spending like mad, then that means there's more money chasing that limited supply. So it could, in theory, have an effect on inflation, slowing the amount that the rate falls by, or indeed meaning that inflation increases. But inflation is more complicated, so it's things like fuel prices, energy prices, as we saw when the Ukraine war started a couple of years ago. Actually, the cost of delivering things, those all go into the inflation rate. So it could have an effect, but I think it's too early to say. What the Chancellor did announce in today's budget was that as things stand, the inflation rate is forecast to fall to the 2% target later on this spring, which is ahead of what was forecast in the autumn statement last November. So I think it's definitely one to watch.
Yeah, it sounds good, doesn't it, the inflation headline coming down, but we've been speaking to so many people here in Grimsby and Cleethorpes who just aren't feeling the benefit of that yet. This has come in from Deb. She says, was there anything for pensioners in the budget? Anything you spotted, Sarah?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one because the cut in the national insurance rate will not benefit pensioners because it applies to people who are working under state pension age. So even if you're somebody who, you could get your state pension, but you are either choosing to or you have to work, you don't benefit from that national insurance rate cut. So now I've been having a look through all the budget documents and I couldn't see anything else specific in it for pensioners, apart from the government has committed to the triple lock on pensions. Now, this was very widely flagged anyway, and the government hasn't said how long it's committed to the triple lock for, but it does mean that the state pension will be going up by 8.5% from April. So that means to somebody who's entitled to the full new state pension, they'll be getting around £221 a week. That's about £11,500 a year. For somebody who's on the old pension who retired before 2016, they're going to get just under £170 a week. Now, I think, again, it's worth saying that our research shows that 1 in 5 people who are currently able to get the state pension live on that as their sole source of income. And that's not easy at the best of times, never mind during the cost of living crisis. So I think for those people, every penny will help, but still very tough times around the corner.
Sarah, this came in from Morgan. What does a British ISA mean? This was announced by the Chancellor today. Morgan asked, can I save more tax-free?
Yeah, so the Chancellor, there are two sort of savings announcements. One was, it's now been called the UK ISA, and that is going to be an extra £5,000 ISA allowance that you can make use of if you invest in UK-based assets. Now, we don't have the detail of this. The government has said it's going to consult on this, so we don't know exactly what this is going to look like. But the idea is to encourage more people to invest in companies that are listed on the London Stock Exchange, so in the UK. And then secondly, he also announced a British savings bond. Now, this is a savings product rather than an investment one. That will be offered by National Savings and Investments from April. We don't know the interest rate yet. It's going to be a 3-year bond with a fixed rate. I was having a look at Best Buy rates just a moment ago, and you can get about 4.5% interest on a 3-year fixed rate bond. I think because of national savings, it may not be quite that competitive, but again, probably will be attractive to a number of people.
Sarah Pennells, really useful to hear from you. Thank you very much for answering some of our viewers' questions on the budget. That's Sarah Pennells there, consumer finance expert. Really good to talk to you. Thank you. And still to come here on the UK Tonight, we'll have more from the people of this region about what today's announcements mean for them. Stay with us.
A corner of North East Lincolnshire, far away from the politics of Westminster. Once a booming fishing port, now lays partly abandoned. Where Labour stood proud for decades, until the town turned blue. An unexpected turn for Grimsby and Cleethorpes. Regeneration is already underway. Hope is on the horizon. With a general election around the corner, Sky News gives voice to the people, exploring the issues that we're all facing and hearing what they want from the next Prime Minister. Each corner's got a story to tell you, but which way will the people vote this time round?
Hello, welcome back to the UK Tonight, live in Cleethorpes for a special programme on today's budget. Now, in his statement in the Commons at lunchtime, the Chancellor confirmed the 2p cut to national insurance, a giveaway for some 27 million workers. But living standards remain squeezed, and according to the budget watchdog, the tax burden is approaching the highest level since the Second World War. Well, let's get some reaction to what happened this afternoon in Westminster from here in Cleethorpes. I'm joined by Shannon Donnelly, influencer and owner of a small business selling personal safety kits, and Mike Burton. He's the owner of a special educational needs schools, both locally and nationally. Hello to you both.
Hi. Good evening.
Right. I'll start with the same question I asked my earlier panel from the local area. Anything in there for Grimsby and Cleethorpes?
I don't know. I think I do think nationally, you look at the national insurance, you can look at the fuel, you can look at all those elements, but I think people locally here are more worried about what's happening tomorrow and how they're going to pay the bills tomorrow, how they're going to feed the family, how they're going to drive. I looked at the fuel aspect, and the one thing I thought to myself is, that's okay, but it's already high enough and it needs to be reduced because a lot of people need it to even get to work and actually to support the families.
Yeah.
And, it's already a struggle. And if you're putting that, you're compounding it, on top of fuel, food and energy, a lot of people are worrying how they're going to do that. And the only people for me is I'm massive on community, I'm massive on family, and you can just see that pressure on the families because it's coming from every angle.
Yeah. There wasn't anything in there for social care. And Shannon, I know that was your background. You worked with children in children's services before you became an entrepreneur in lockdown and set up your own business. So I suppose you sort of had an eye on it in that respect, in sort of your old career and your new one. Yeah. Anything for that? Because, that's two areas where a lot of help is needed, it's said, from those who work in those areas.
It's an area that massively struggles, and from what I saw earlier, no help whatsoever, which is such a shame because it has a huge effect in Grimsby and Cleethorpes if, more funding was available.
Tell us a bit about your business, because it's a really interesting one, and you have found so many benefits of setting up your business here in this region. Talk to us about that.
So we obviously had to sell the safety keychains. We are an online business. And
so these are kits for women to keep themselves safe when they're out and about or if they're travelling. And
but it's so much more than that because it benefits people's mental health as well, which people are hugely struggling at the moment with everything that's going on. We did want to have a shop front, which luckily in this area the rent is quite cheap, but I just didn't see the benefits at the current moment with opening a shop around here, which is such a shame, which is why we've stayed online. We do still have customers in the area that do come and pick up, but there's not very much going on.
Yeah. Mike, I know you're really passionate about mental health, and there was nothing in the budget that addressed any extra funding. That area,
actually,
which is massive and
some of the things
that
was hinted at was around, large amounts of money going in to support people with mental health in work, to stay in work, but also, to get people back into work. Yeah. And I was really looking forward to seeing that happen because obviously owning, special needs schools for children with social and emotional mental health, ADHD, and learning difficulties, I know how hard it is for people who are coming from a disadvantage to be able to get into work, and then even harder to stay in work at the time. But the one positive, and I know sometimes there's going to be a lot of negatives that come out of this, I do think that the actions they made around the childcare element, and, people being able to access the benefits is going to be one positive that comes out of that, because that some people, especially before when it was just on one person's wage, they had to make a decision whether to go to work or stay at home because it was that close for some people. And I think people, and we talk about mental health, people need purpose in life. And I mentioned this to Tom yesterday, is that people need purpose, and without work, that affects the mental health. Being a full-time parent all the time can be tough as well because you need your own time. Yeah. So I think that's going to be really good to be able to support some people, especially families who've got two incomes.
Yeah. Shannon, in the build-up to this budget, it was billed as tax cuts versus public spending, and there was a tax cut for those that will benefit with the national insurance announcement. But when it came to public spending, it's the status quo. It's not going to increase, it's going to decrease. What the Chancellor said is, we're going to stay with the same level of spending, which is 1%, but essentially we're going to spend it better. How did you take that news? Because, public services is really is a really hot topic in Grimsby and Cleethorpes, the erosion of them and the money that they feel they're not getting.
Yeah, I think in this area, I mean, obviously for myself, probably everybody else, dentist appointments, doctor's appointments, anything like that, it's just chaos. You're waiting a very long time. And although I understand where they're coming from in terms of making the money last and it be more spread out, if that makes sense, I don't know. Do we need more money? Is it how it's used?
Yeah.
There was obviously talk about AI, I don't...
Yeah, essentially that's what the Chancellor was saying. It's like, the money is there, we just need to use it better, whether it's streamlining, you know, updating systems. What was your view on that?
No, I think I've got a controversial view of that. I think, you know, all the things that's came out today, and I think we forget the average Joe. The average Joe won't be able to interpret the information that's come out. Do you know, even us talking about it this evening? And I think we've got to move with the modern times in that, you know, we're looking at, and I heard somebody on the previous panel that was on here talking around catering for the elderly generation and the modern generation. And I think if we break down the way that information, you know, interpreted and then, you know, displayed to the public, I think you'll get more buy-in. And I think people are looking at who to vote for. A lot of people are going to be undecided, and you could actually sway that by actually looking at the way that you communicate the information. Because I said this yesterday, a lot of people will get asked questions like you just asked me, and they'll be a bit undecided. What they need is clear hope. Yeah. And a lot of people can get behind some hope, and I think today a lot of people was left wondering because nothing was really big enough.
Wasn't clear.
And sometimes it's, and I know fortune favours the brave, and I think it might have just been a bit too safe.
Yeah, well, that has been said. It was conservative, it was sensible, when what people really wanted was something going into this general election year to go, oh, right, that could be the deciding factor for me, and we didn't get that. So how are you feeling at the moment, Shannon? Because, you know, we don't know when the general election is. It will be sometime this year, so there might be a bit of time to make your mind up if it's in the autumn. But what's going to swing it for you? What's going to be the deciding factors for you, do you think? It's just so difficult. And like we were saying earlier, I just feel as though I can't trust what anybody says. Over the last couple of years with what's happened, and I don't want to vote Conservative because of what's happened in the last couple of years, but then I don't feel like Labour offer very much either. And I feel like everybody's saying the same. We just don't know what to do. I've heard that a lot over the last couple of days.
We can't trust what anybody says. They'll say what you want to hear, but are they actually going to deliver on it?
Yeah.
I think for me, I'm a big believer that sometimes you have to take away the big national picture and look at what's happening right here. And nobody's asked me to say this, is that I think action speaks louder than words. Yeah. I give inspirational talks locally every day, do you know, online, but then I also do things in the public. I went to give a talk at a loneliness event at Christmas, and there was a woman there, and she won't know I'm going to say this, and I didn't know her prior, was Melanie On, and she was there at this event with 150 people who was there lonely at Christmas, and she was dancing with at least 50 of them, and she was there, and she said to me, when she was there, and she said, oh, I think that's really lovely what you're doing there, Melanie. She went, I said, what are you going to do when you're running again, you know, and going forward? She went, I just want to put the community at the heart of everything. So if she can put her actions, do you know, where, you know, her words was, then I will most probably vote for
off
Melanie.
that same with Melanie. Any event that when she was here, any event that I did, she was always there. When we did the campaign in Cleethorpes for the environment, she was there.
But that's the thing, I have heard that a lot. The sort of nationalist issues boiled down to local issues and about the candidate that cares the most about this area, which, you know, is going to happen up and down the UK.
She's just so approachable. Like, she was walking a dog a couple of months ago and I was having a conversation with her. She's just so approachable.
There you go. You need your local MP to be accessible. And Shannon and Mike, thank you. Mike, we saw you swimming in Tom Parmenter's report earlier on. Glad you got your clothes on and you're dry. Promise me you'll get our national correspondent Tom Parmenter in the water next time. You check it out.
100%, no problem.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about why we are here in Grimsby and Cleethorpes. They are our target towns in the build-up to a general election.
In this study, we're trying to model fetal development. We're trying to model how the babies develop in the late stage of pregnancy. So this started by looking at the amniotic fluid, which is a solution that surround and protect the baby during development. And we look at the cells, at the various cell types that are present in this resource. We identified progenitors, we identified cells that are stem cells and are specific to certain tissues of the fetus. And we decided to try to grow them into what the press is calling mini organs. We prefer to call them organoids. The idea is to use these organoids to model fetal development, so to model how the human tissues are developing, to use them to model disease. And so we tried to do this with a disease that affects the development of the lung. And so what we've seen is that in the presence of this disease, the organoids that we grow are different from the one of normal babies. And based on this, we expect in the future to be able to use this technology to test drugs that are specific for these babies, so in a personalized medicine manner, and basically use these as a predictive model for how the pregnancies is going to unravel. This research is done both at UCL and Great Ormond Street Hospital, and in the lab, together with Professor Paolo De Copi, which is my mentor, we put these cells into three-dimensional culture. So it's organoids are something that is getting quite established in medical technology. It's a discovery that is around since 2009. And these cells are basically grown in 3 dimensions, in a bubble of gel, and they expand and form these mini masses of tissue. The way we see it going forward is to use this as advanced diagnostic method, because in theory, it should be able to predict how severe certain disease would be as a drug testing method, and then the sky's the limit. With this platform, we are able to access the pregnancy while the pregnancy is still going on.
Okay.
And this is very relevant because we can theoretically intervene while the baby is still developing in a personalized manner. We don't really manipulate anything here. We just take cells out, expand them in culture, and that's it. There's no, we don't bring them back, we don't make them into something that could develop in a fetus, an embryo, or whatever. We're simply taking a snapshot of what's the status of the tissue at that specific moment in development.
Well, as we've been saying throughout the day, Sky News is going to be spending more and more time in Grimsby and here in Cleethorpes in the weeks and months ahead. They are our target towns. And the new parliamentary constituency, Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes, is just the kind of place that Labour needs to win if it's to secure a majority at the next general election. So we want to know exactly what the people here think, what's important to them, and what any would-be government needs to do to win their vote. Before coming here tonight, I spent the day in Grimsby to get people's views on today's budget. Give me a snapshot of what it's like to run Gary's Meat at the moment in the current climate in Grimsby.
Well, it takes a lot of hard work, a lot of hours, a lot of commitments, and at the moment it's paying off. It's, like I say, there's a lot of overheads that have gone up, and it's tough. But it's tough to make it all work. You know, you have to put a lot of hours in.
Yeah. You're operating on fine margins, aren't you?
Yes, yeah, very.
Squeezed every which way. So you were talking to me earlier about, you know, the cost of the produce we see behind us, the energy bills, less money in people's pocket.
Yeah, the energy bills, it went up £500 in a quarter, and I had to find that. I didn't put prices up, I found it, you know, so it takes a lot of work.
We have good weeks and we have not so good weeks, whereas we always had good weeks prior to it all. My fuel costs have gone more than doubled, and it's a worry in the fact that I was earning a reasonably good living because I'm putting the effort in, the staff and the team are putting the effort in to make the business workable, doable, and it does. But now I'm just earning a living.
The divide between those that have a lot and those that really don't have very much seems massive. And like you said, the budget doesn't really factor the divide is so big. What do you want to see from a general election in terms of what party can come in? What do they need to say to convince you that it's not just sticking plasters, they're really going to get a handle on this problem?
Let's see some funding coming through to local people like ourselves, so where we can get on the ground and do the jobs that need to be done and provide to those people that really do need provision. And let's get some of those, you know, stop putting sticking plasters on, and let's get to the real issue and get to the real heart of it, and let's start to tackle it.
If you looked at Jeremy Hunt's speech and you took out his electioneering and finger-pointing and blaming Labour for, you know, everything, he could have delivered that speech probably in half the time. In terms of content, no rabbit out of the hat, no surprises.
Anything in there that's going to affect your life?
To me, it's not going to make a great deal of difference, and I don't think there's a lot in there that's going to get the people of Great Grimsby jumping up and down either.
And there was also some talk about helping young people get onto the property ladder. Does any of that resonate with you?
I mean, they talk about making affordable housing more affordable, but how can you make something that's already extortionate more affordable? You can't drop it. There is no way to be able to do that. And without that big amount of money that you can get from your parents to be able to afford a house, it's not going to help at all to get you on the property ladder.
Well, Gurpreet is back with me. And Gurpreet, you know, just some of the people we spoke to today in Grimsby and talking about what the budget meant or didn't mean to them, because it's about what the people of Grimsby and Cleethorpes want and need, and there wasn't much in today's budget for them, was there?
No, if we think about the thrust of this budget, well, the headline grabber was that 2p cut in national insurance. And let's not take away from it, it is a significant tax cut. When we combine that with what we saw in November, it's a 4p tax cut. It's worth about £900 to the average household. But the problem is, and we've heard this repeatedly on the programme, it's been sandwiched by massive tax rises in the form of those frozen thresholds. It means that some people are actually going to be worse off. So if you earn less than £19,000 a year, you're actually going to be worse off when you look at the net position. People on 50k are doing the best. The average salary in Grimsby is £28,000 a year. So there will be some people who benefit, but they are not the main beneficiaries of this policy. And when we think about some of the issues here in Grimsby, well, it's got higher than average levels of unemployment. There are a higher proportion of people here who aren't even looking for work because they're too sick for work, too sick to work. And it's had the biggest declines in years in good health of anywhere in the country. The gap between here and somewhere like Berkshire is 15 years. So as you can imagine, there's very little appetite for cuts to public spending. And whatever we hear from the Chancellor today or in the coming days, there's no getting away from the fact that public services are being cut. So while total spending is increasing, there are some budgets, things like prisons, courts, local authorities, which are facing really massive cuts over the coming years. And it's communities like those here who rely more heavily on those types of public services that will face the brunt of that. And also, they're crying out for investment in public infrastructure here, things like new transport links. It's why the promises of levelling up back in 2019 really cut through, because people want to spend more money on public infrastructure here. But from the budget today, we actually saw more cuts to public investment. So I think all of that might help explain why you're getting quite a muted reaction here.
OK, Gurpreet. Thank you, Gurpreet Nauman, our political correspondent. He's been with me in Grimsby and Cleethorpes today, talking to people about what the budget means for them and looking ahead to that general election. No date, of course, yet. But we'll be here in Grimsby and Cleethorpes throughout the year, talking to people about the political twists and turns as we approach a general election. We'll see you tomorrow night at 8.